How many of you guys at age 18 decided you wanted to go into data? You know, that's where you're smartest, right? I'm looking around the room and I'm not seeing a single hand raised, right? Not even Todd's, right?
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Were you playing at 18 now?
No, I wasn't. I was into IT.
Okay. You're here because what typically happens in the DAMA environment is that you're in IT or you're in business, and things are not going as well as you'd like. And eventually you sort of realize that data is the root cause of a lot of evils that are out there going on, right? I don't mean that data is bad, it's just that bad data practices hurt businesses and hurt the way organizations try to do this. And you start to yell about the data. You start to say, hey, we should do something with this data. And eventually you've said data 3 times magically. Your organization all of a sudden goes, great, you're the data person. Right? Does that happen to a lot of you guys?
Yeah. Put your heels together.
Exactly, put your heels together, or Beetlejuice. Right? Whatever it is that pulls you up in order to get that. And what that does is it leaves us as a profession where people only show up because they're interested in this. Right? I mean, just even think about the journey from the front desk to here, right? I pointed several of you guys, keep walking, you're in the right direction, you're getting going in the right direction, all this sort of stuff that goes on. So we have lots that we'd love to talk to you about. We don't have as much time as we'd like to get, but we'll do whatever we can. But more importantly, this is the start of a conversation. And another thing that you should do, which Billy's really set up very, very well, is if you're here by yourself and you don't know anybody, just walk up and say, hey, right? I'm Peter. I'm Brian. Hi, Brian. Nice to meet you, right? We didn't rehearse this. We got a couple more we're going to do, though. He's going, oh, God, why did I do this? But it is important to do that because this is the way this community will be built. And we're going to give you a couple of half-baked ideas, I guess, maybe more than half-baked. But
Yeah, and you're still soft in the middle.
Exactly. And one of my favorite sayings, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry.
One of my favorite sayings is by George Box. Anybody know George Box's favorite saying? All models are wrong.
Yeah. But some are useful.
But some models are useful. And that's what we're going to try to do today, is give you guys some stuff to hopefully build on.
Yeah. And nothing will be perfect. So, you know, one of the things that Peter and I talk about all the time, whether it's at work, at home, at play, is you have to really learn to be flexible and adaptive. So take these things that we're sharing with you today, try them on for size like a good pair of trousers, right? In front of the mirror, see how they look on you, but recognize that you're going to have to take them in, you're going to have to roll the cuffs up, you're going to have to do things to make them work for your organizations. So these are prototypes and concepts, and it's really up to you to take it to the next level.
So how many of you all would identify just from the start as primarily on the business side of things? Okay, and then of course how many on IT? How many consider yourselves kind of ambidextrous, or you're both, right? And we do find that a lot in data, that you're able to speak both business and data, and that's really, really helpful in terms of that. How many of you are satisfied with your ability to leverage data in support of your organization's mission? Okay, so we're in the right place then. That's what we've been talking about for a while. Todd and I have known each other for about 5 years, I guess, at this point.
More than that.
We're not? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, Todd's got a fairly sordid history. He worked for a lot of places he can't tell you about. But, you know, real pleased that he's up here in New York State doing this sort of thing. I have a very bizarre background myself. I am part university professor, and your first question outside of most DAMA chapters is, why the heck would you want a professor talking to you about something real, right? I also spend about a third of my time out working with the DAMA chapters and doing these presentations, and about a third of the time working on very consulting projects so I can keep going, because I don't want to get stale in this area. It's very easy. Yeah. We do have a couple disclaimers we have to do just to make sure we're not endorsing any specific methods or anything like that. Todd, I forget what this is.
Similarly, any views and opinions that we share with you today are our opinions and views, and they do not necessarily represent the views and opinions of New York State or the federal government. So this is our show, it's about us, happy to share.
Yeah, exactly. So let's jump right in and talk about data strategy. And one of the things we've found over the years is that most organizations really do have a lot of trouble getting started with the data strategy because they don't kind of figure out where it is as a blank sheet of paper. And I analogize this back very much like to students. You probably have had an experience like this yourself. Monday morning at 8 o'clock you need a 10-page paper done, and it's Sunday night and you haven't started, right? So there's that terror of the blank screen of where do I get started? This is a little easier than that. Data assets have one mission and one mission only, and that is to support whatever the organizational strategy is. if you have trouble with strategy, or and really it's not you guys, but it's the people you're working with. Well, we're state government. We don't do strategy.
That's right. How many of your organizations actually have an organizational strategy? Are there any out there? 1, 2, 5 or 6 out of all of you. That's pretty telling all by itself.
The real key, though, is that if you substitute the word mission for strategy, everything else works perfectly. And all of your groups have a mission of some sort. It's out there on your website, right? That's one of the first things that they do when they try to articulate what is the value that's going on. We see this happening then in 2 phases. There's a series of prerequisites that have to occur in order to be successful at this. And then we get into data strategy. We say this is actually pretty easy. I know that's a little scary to say that, but that's why we put it out as lather, rinse, and repeat. Everybody knows how to wash their hair. Of course, the problem with lather, rinse, and repeat, if you actually follow the directions literally, you never leave the shower. I can sit there and shower your hair, but it does come out to be a little bit around that. What we're going to talk about are these 2 phases today. But as far as prerequisites go, there's 3 major ones, and we're going to dive right in and take a look. But there are some very different ways this needs to be done. We need to have leadership in here, and again, this is why having the right type of talent available to this. You can't go out and get a degree in CDO right now, right? There is a program at University of Little Rock out there that is a certificate type of thing, but it's really not set up for industry in terms of where that's working on. And we're going to eliminate the 7 deadly data sins. So that's sort of the main meat of this piece. But we'll throw in some other stuff as well just to get started. This does require a different approach to this. And even though we don't even have this in the book, I'm actually getting quoted on this piece already, which is kind of amazing. All of your businesses are about data. And that's true for all the business. Think about executive management. What are they doing? They're looking at facts and figures that come into play, right? And they're trying to figure it out. Ford Motor Company is about data. All right, Apple Computer is about data. All of these companies are about data. It's just a question of getting their executives to realize that until you get to the point of making a thing, that's the point at which you are no longer dealing exclusively with data. Does that make sense to everybody? It was kind of a nice little bit, and we haven't actually written it down anywhere, but people are already diving in and saying, yes, we need to do this. By the way, any questions? Best way to do this, right?
Best if this is a discussion, but one of the things I tell my wife all the time is my wife's a lawyer in DC, and I tell her, I say, sweetheart, the next Supreme Court case is going to be about refrigerators. She looks at me with like I have 3 heads. She goes, what are you talking about? I said, think about it. The Internet of Things is changing fundamentally where the data is coming from. Things that are electrical are going to become sources of data. So think about this. You go grocery shopping, put your hamburger in there, maybe your Hot Pockets and pizza go in the freezer, you put in your milk or your yogurts in there. Refrigerators are going to be very, very intelligent things in the very near future. They're going to tell what goes in and what goes out. If it knows those 2 things, it knows how long it's sitting there. If it's able to detect a transponder on there, it's going to know what it is, its nutritional value. One day you're going to go to the mailbox and you're going to open up a letter and maybe your insurance rates have gone up and you're going to be scratching your head and going, well, how did this happen? So who owns the data that the refrigerators are going to be collecting? Right? These are the kinds of questions, the things that are going to be completely new to us, that are going to be grounded in data and managing that data and making sure that we have the right pedigree on that data at all times.
And I guess we can go ahead and plug in Corinne's data literacy series that you're getting ready to do at the forum, right?
Yeah.
So we're seeing society in general needs to become more data literate. What does that really mean? Probably our next little
That'll be the next
topic that we're diving into on that stuff. There's also, of course, an incredible gap in most of our organizations. What we like to say is that data management works very well at the work group level. But now you're trying to still get it up into whatever corporate is or upper management. And the problem is, right now, that's dependent on you guys and your teams that you have. And you're trying to help direct those teams and organize those teams and make it so that those teams can do this process of taking data and turning it into information. But it's totally dependent on tribal knowledge. Wetware is the stuff between our ears, right? And most importantly, non-repeatable practices, which means we're not ever going to get good at it. So part of data strategy is building core capabilities for your organization so that whatever changes comes into play, it will be better in the long run.
Yep. How many of you have documented processes and procedures relative to your data?
Good.
Really?
Excellent.
When you buy the data, when you acquire the data, are they documented? No? How about when you provision and deprovision? When you move it from here to there, there's another hand, 2 hands. How about when you are done with it, you dispose of the data? 1 hand. Good example of the kinds of things that we need to have here. Otherwise, tribal knowledge, each one of us ends up making it up every single day. My goal in New York is I want to be able to make the same mistake 2 times in a row. If I can do that, then I can start adjusting things. But if I cannot make the same mistake 2 times in a row, I'm forever fiddling with things.
All these slides are yours. Okay, we're going to give you the slides at the end of the program. Most importantly, you guys are going to come back at us and say, hey, instead of that way, I got a better way of articulating this. This just happened in Chicago last Friday. I was in Chicago doing a very similar type of program, and I'll show you the piece that I did, and I said, I want some help. Okay, we're not the smartest bulbs in the room. Right, you guys are going to be able to look at this stuff and go, I've got a much better way of articulating that, and we're going to say thank you because you're going to bring it into the DAMA community, and we're going to give it back to everybody else. Okay, I've got 3 books over there. They're not really written for you guys. They're really written for your managers. Right? We want you guys to take that stuff and use it. And when we don't do it right, tell us about it. We'll get the feedback and we'll reincorporate it. So you'll see some things in here that are contributions from people over the years that have added to this stuff. So let's look a little bit further at our data. And one of the things that we really need to do is sort of separate the wheat from the chaff. Data that is better organized increases in value. I mean, no, most people don't disagree, but if I can't find something and I'm looking for it, right, it's just going to take longer, and that hurts our organizational productivity. These end up costing people money, and this is a pretty big insight. There's a wonderful book that we won't hit too much in here, but it's called How to Measure Anything. A guy named Douglas Hubbard has written this book, and I've sold more copies of this book, even though I've written 10 books. All right, I've sold tons and tons of his books that are out there. He also has the best book on big data. It's called Pulse. So if you're trying to figure out how big data works into things, Big Data Pulse is a really, really good book in there. And now, oh, you come all the way up from Virginia, you tell us our data is rot. Boy, that's really nice, right? Well, it's an acronym. It stands for data that is redundant, obsolete, or trivial. And actually, that's all wrong too. My wife, who helps me as well with this, she says it's really riot. Okay? It's really redundant, incomplete, obsolete, or trivial. But if I go out and tell you guys riot, you guys repeat it to your boss, we've lost our, all our credibility around that as well. There is lots of good data in our organizations, but there's lots of copies of that data. And having to manage those copies of it, and which copy and which version and all the rest of the things that go on. What it really comes down to is that organizations have very little idea what they have. They don't know where it is, and they have no idea what their knowledge workers are doing with it. And that is not the situation that we want to go forward in this environment into.
Yeah, so how many of you have an inventory of your data? How many of you really understand what data your organizations have in your physical possession? Where it is? What machines is it on? What are people doing with that data? So if you think about it, if you're going out and you're acquiring data that's under commercial licenses, are you really able to keep track of the licenses that go that accompany that data? Maybe it's CPU bound, maybe it's named user bound. Are you keeping track of that? You understand the terms and conditions that come along with that data if you're getting through sharing relationships and how that relates to the IT, how that IT has to be configured. You check when you move data from machine to machine. Those are all things that are all dependent on having an accurate inventory of your data. Without it, you're going to be making it up every day.
Although this is a great place to illustrate one of the challenges. We should have done a little role playing here, but I'm going to pretend I'm your new CEO. You're in a corporate CEO role, right? Okay. So as a CEO, I might turn around to Todd and have heard him talk about that and say inventory. Okay, how long is it going to take you to do your data inventory, Todd?
Well, I can tell you, sir, that I only know the numerator, and I won't know because I don't know how many things we have. I don't know, sir.
How many CEOs' heads are exploding right at the moment?
They're all saying, I'm not paying for that.
Yeah. So don't let them get trapped into this, I will have my inventory done by, because that's a project.
Yep.
What do we want data to be?
Process.
Program, actually. Processes included,
Yep.
right? Absolutely.
Yep.
So rather than Todd getting trapped, and Todd's boss hasn't asked him for this yet, but rather than getting
My
trapped.
former boss did.
Yes, that's right, your former.
I said, I'm sorry, sir. Honestly, I cannot tell you when we're going to be done. Because what are organizations constantly doing? They're constantly acquiring more data. So it's like, taking two steps forward and one step backwards. You're constantly sliding backwards. I said, sir, if we were to stop collecting data tomorrow, then I might have a chance of actually telling you how many we've got. But short of that, I have absolutely no idea. So, programmatics.
So the key is to change that conversation around and don't let people get trapped into that. How long is it going to take you to get a complete, thorough inventory of your entire data? I have never seen anybody in 33 years actually finish that task. So what can you do? You offer up and say, look, what we will do is put in place a system so that when we find new piles of data, we can start to collect them, but also collect some of the measures around those so that we now, this is good stuff, this is where we use to close the books, this is when we do this, blah, 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 blah. And now you have a process to do this. Now you can prioritize and make sense in terms of your approach. But look at the difference between a program versus a project. The project is, when are you going to have that inventory complete? You've been at it for 6 months now.
It's got to be done any day now.
Yeah, any day now.
But you all know the difference between a program and a project, right?
Well, who's PMI certified here?
The PMI guys?
No, PMI? Oh, okay, we'll come back to that.
So projects have beginnings, middles, and ends, right? They have discrete time and resources applied to them. And if you think about it, if you were to treat cataloging or inventorying your data as a project, you'd finish up, you'd pat yourself on the back, you'd be on to the next project. Meanwhile, more data is rolling in the front door. So part of what Peter and I are advocating is that you have to pull this work out of projects, put it at a higher level, and it becomes a sustainable activity, a program. It begins and it ends when your organization no longer requires that function to be performed. It needs to be part of the new business in a data-driven environment, which is what we're in today.
And let's give a little analogy. You'll need that no longer the same time you no longer need an HR organization in your organizations. Right. And then they go, oh no, another one of those? Well, yes, but if you didn't have HR, think how bad things would be in your organizations, right?
Yeah.
So we're trying to say there's similar improvements that can occur in the data space as well. One of the problems that we have with this is that people have a very incorrect version of how this works. And I'm going to blame a lot on academics, so that's one of the reasons I stay in academics, so I can throw stones out of the glass house. But we teach people about systems thinking, and we say it consists of people, process, hardware, and software and data. Okay? Problem is, the data part of this is really changing. Todd said he's worried about the Supreme Court case that's going to go for the refrigerator, right? I'm worried about the one that the refrigerator killed somebody, because that will be something that will happen at some point too. You're thinking, how on earth could it kill somebody? Well, if you're putting milk in and you drink milk and it's bad and it does something, don't get too far, but you could have, the refrigerators will kill somebody before it's too long. We'll have to figure out all the bits of it. Data is different. Okay? You build these things once, you buy them once, you evolve these things, and of course people are going to change, but our data stuff is really, really crazy. So this is a wonderful chart that's put together every year that says for every minute of every day for the entirety of 2016, we did some stuff. For example, Americans uploaded 18 megabytes of mobile data. Cool. Makes AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, and all the rest of those guys really, really rich. Netflix streams in 1 minute 86,000 hours of video programming. Okay, that's a bunch. We won't ask if anybody's on Tinder, but apparently there are 1 million Tinder swipes back and forth every minute. 1 million Tinder swipes every minute. The Weather Channel responds to 14 million requests every minute. The text messages, we send 3.5 million every minute. And Amazon makes a little over $200,000. Amazon makes about a penny on each order, just so that you get the volume for those. So yeah, data is a little bit different. And one of the first pieces of advice for you guys is one that came from Micheline Casey, who was the first state CDO ever back in Colorado a couple of years ago. And you can use this to win some arguments when you're sitting down having a discussion with people. Anybody know what it is? All right. There will never be any less data than right now. And if you wait 5 minutes, say it again, it will still be true. just to give you an idea of what's going on. We can't say that about hardware. We can't say that about software. People, it takes time to train them up. This is the only part of this that actually makes that part true.
But this is also the part that scares people, right? The problem is so enormous that people become paralyzed. But really what we need to do is we need to start small. How do you eat the elephant? One bite at a time, right? So you pick a project, you pick a problem, and you solve that problem, you step back, you identify another one, you solve that, you step back, and you iterate over this space. And then when you're done, you lather, rinse, and repeat. You go right back to the beginning. Do it all over again.
So somebody's going to tweet that we were talking about redundant elephant parts today.
Yes. Rotten ones.
Yeah, rotten elephant part. Okay, first piece of this then is, got to do change management. Right? If we want people to follow us and do things differently, we have to do this. We don't have to reinvent that wheel. Okay, I don't know if New York State government has change management professionals employed, but I'd be really surprised if they don't. And if you don't, you can rent them for very inexpensively. Not that they are cheap, but they do a good job on this. So change management, absolutely critical, because if you're going to make a difference, you're going to break some eggs, lose some cheese, whatever little bits that you want to
Drop some rice balls.
Exactly. Then, of course, because we haven't been teaching people since age 18 how to be data leaders around this, you've got to find some qualified staff. So, world's oldest profession?
Prostitution.
No, accounting. Come on. That's always a trick. I always get a... Then we can come over here and actually go, hey Siri, or Alexa, or whatever. No, the world's oldest profession is accounting. And I guess that's what the definition of a profession is, right? But we've been formalizing these accounting practices for 8,000 years. These are beer sales records, okay, that are written in hieroglyphics. So this is cuneiform, actually.
So see, the other point to make here, Peter, is data preceded IT. And we had other ways of managing and accounting for our data long before we ever invented the computer. So oftentimes you'll hear the example like, data is a result of IT. No, it's not. Go read the scriptures. There it is. That's how much they paid for the beer 8,000 years ago.
So our profession, if we really stretch, anybody know who Ada King was? She's the world's first programmer. 1850, before computers were invented, she sat down and said, hey, I think I've got a way of coming up with solving Bernoulli equations. And she's looking at the looms, and the looms were how to weave patterns into cloth, and we were programming those using... Who's actually used these? Anybody in here? Yeah, okay, got a couple of you guys. They're still out there for doing that. It's appropriate for us then to say that if we have 150 years of history here, we are immature. It's not okay for us to stay immature. And that's really the mission of DAMA, is to try and push all of this forward so that collectively we learn. You guys are state government, so you're not really looking at competing against each other, but it doesn't matter. We get banks in the room and we can talk about metadata, and they will cooperate around those pieces as well. But now I want you to think of a hiring panel who said we're going to go out and hire this animal of a chief data officer. Do they know what to ask for? Right? I mean, have you ever had a panel that has correctly assessed your knowledge, skills, and abilities? Obviously this one, besides that one, right? It's really, really challenging. I've got a couple tilbers just because I can't resist. The sales estimate looks like this as the PHB, remember pointy-haired boss, PHB. Sally, who's a smart engineer, says that chart looks like the one you used us yesterday about our travel. This is how to solve your analytics. Just standardize on one chart. We can get the data to do whatever it is we want, right? Well, these are hard. And the other part of this is, we've just set up the first enterprise data executive here to come in and make major changes in the organization, try to do some things with knowledge, skills, and ability that the organization isn't really familiar with. This is a unicorn. Of course, this is telling you there are no unicorns. Actually, I have one that I met. This is the only unicorn I've ever met. I think that's actually a pretty nice unicorn, but I don't think I want them running my data, right? So, not bad. But the first CDO...
What?
may not make it. Gonna ruffle a bunch of feathers, get some people who are slightly out of their comfort zone.
Yeah.
So maybe there's a different set of skills that are around this that we need to have, and that's not a bad thing to think about either. We were talking a little at breakfast. The average CIO is only in their job between 2 to 4 years. Just to give you a contrast, the average CFO for comparable organizations stays in their job for 12 years. That's a pretty big gap. So we haven't quite figured out the CIO role now. We're not sure what's really going to happen with the CDO role.
Right.
My own title for it is actually Enterprise Data Executive or Top Data Job, because that way you don't have to be in there. First thing you do when you say chief is they go, do we need any more chiefs up here at all? Now you're having a different conversation about the whole thing. So the first Enterprise Data Executive may not do very well. So that's context. We're still in this leading up, and this is what really we're going to talk about today, the 7 deadly data sins. And we build them up from the bottom here. So we've already talked about culture and culture management, which means this stuff again, we already talked about it. But what do you need to make change actually stick in organizations? Anybody gone through a big organizational change initiative? Okay, many of you are raising your hand, yeah, we tried, or something like that. This is a wonderful chart from that Mary Lippert put together a while ago. We will see, for example, that an organization may have skills, the incentive, the resources, and the action plan, but if they are lacking the vision, they end up with just confusion. Similarly, if you have the vision, incentive, resources, and action plan, but you're missing the skills, anxiety, and we can build the rest of this all the way on out. Again, these are charts for you guys, so absolutely take them. But the bottom line here, if you don't have all of these things aligned, it is very hard to make change actually happen. Everybody else goes, let's get technical about the data stuff. No, this is important stuff here as well. Because culture is the biggest impediment to getting people to think they're shifting in organizations. You've had a lot of specific experiences in that, from State Department, all sorts of other things. We didn't have time to put this in here today, but if you'd like to read a very good academic case study, and I say that even though I wrote it, but I'm really pleased with what came out of here. This is the Journal of Data and Information Quality, blah, blah, blah. It's the stuff, if you have trouble sleeping at night, get this stuff, it'll put you to sleep right away. But we put a case study out there for some organization, we're just calling it a big company, and it's free. So we had to actually buy this from the academic people so you guys could download it for free. And we'd love to get your feedback on this, to do this. But if you're trying to figure out what are the culture aspects that we're going to have to deal with, this is really where it comes into. So I'm not going to give you this right here, but you can go out and download it right from there. So that's the first deadly sin, culture. Right? We've got to work on change management and making big changes on this. Second one, sequencing. Now, what do I mean by sequencing? Well, when you're doing strategy at the most basic level, there are only 2 dimensions to strategy. The first one is making something more efficient and more effective. And the second one is innovation. But you'll notice these are orthogonally related. So I want you to, most organizations are really not very good at this, and so that's not a very good place to start. But everybody okay with just using Walmart as an efficient and effective organization, a representation of that? I spent 3 years there, so I can tell you they're pretty darn good at that. Squeezing pennies out of every little thing that happens there. Let's just take Apple as a company that's innovative. Okay, now maybe innovation to Apple is stealing things from everybody else and putting them in their phones, but whether you like that or not, what I want you to think about, these people up here, telling them now that you want them to be efficient and effective, or these people here, telling them that you want them to be innovative, boom, heads exploding. You can't do them both. And yet this is what we see happen to most organizations. They go, I want to go directly from here to here. Now, does anybody else see an advantage on this slide of going 1, 2, 3, and 4? Don't have to do that. We've got lots of organizations that have a very valid reason for going straight from here to here. If you go to here first, you can save some money for your organization. And I'll tell you some stories a little bit later on about how we've been doing it in state government in Virginia in order to do this. And that money that you save here can then be used to fund some of these innovation projects and things like that. So little things like that make a lot of difference. Everybody okay with that? Again, trying to do both right at the start though, good luck, it just does not work. Only 1 in 10 organizations actually has a board-approved strategy, and again, what I want you to think of is, if you do it this way and save some things, Now we can use those savings to fund something else that'd be really kind of cool. When you look at a book, but most of the other books that are written on strategy, what they'll tell you is that your data strategy needs to be a combination of your governance, your quality, your architecture, your master data, your efforts. And we looked at these and found there's probably another 24 of these things that we don't even have in here. So what's wrong with this? This makes sense, doesn't it? Shouldn't it actually be an accumulation of all of these things? Anybody got any of these documents? Not seeing any hand. Some?
Some.
Which ones? Just out of curiosity.
Data governance.
Okay, so you got a governance strategy, right?
Yes.
That's
Data governance.
Data governance, right. But nothing else. Does this make sense that this is what your data strategy should be? But of course you don't have these documents. So here's a great consulting trick. Let's build all these documents out and let's hire a consultant to pull them all together and pull out a data strategy, right? No. It's so foreign from our lather, rinse, and repeat. Instead, what we'd like you to think of this is that your data strategy is a great way to start practicing some of those things. Another way of representing that same concept, by the way, would be the Dinbach wheel that Billy showed earlier with all the various pie wedges around the corner. First thing about data strategy, number them. Why? Because if I tell you this is data strategy version 1, what do you automatically expect? Version 2. Right? Now, are you saying your data strategy is going to change that dramatically? Maybe, depending on what you're trying to do. If you tell them it's version 1, they will start to think, okay, version 1, then we go to version 2, version 3, and we'll work on forward. It's also very nice to tie deliverables to a version. So when we did version 1, we saved X, or we improved service to the consumers, or whatever, around that process. Everybody okay with the numbering? Absolutely critical. You'd be amazed at how many times you look at a data strategy and it's got no numbers on it. Then somebody else who's not necessarily maybe a supporter of the data stuff, because after all, it's a zero-sum game when we get to the top. Right? Somebody says, oh, well, your data strategy was terrible. You know, therefore, we get rid of it, right? Well, the version 1 might not have been as good as you want, but you hope that version 2 is going to be better and work your way on it. So I'm going to make up a story here and just say that the first piece of this was about an organization, a health organization, okay, that was trying to keep track of some thing that would be better handled by master data management. Now, some of you probably are familiar with master data management, which is our radical insight that some data is more important than others, right? Now, if you're really old, you go back to transaction processing against master files, which is sort of what the architecture of that does. I've seen a lot of organizations spend tens of millions of dollars with very good companies to buy some very fine software. And the software goes in as an MDM solution, and then a year later you hear somebody, oh, I couldn't figure out where to stick the data, so I stuck it in the MDM. Right away you know you've lost, right? Because if they're just sticking stuff in the MDM, they're not treating that master data the way it should be treated.
That's right. And this is in part where there should be a very nice hand-in-glove relationship between your data governance body and the decisions that are surrounding the MDM. So what is a master data element? It is an element that everybody has agreed would represent a particular concept. How does that decision get made? Ideally, it should be made by the business in a data governance environment, and then IT has information from which to build their systems, modify their systems, and so on and so forth. There are ways to do this. It's not the kind of thing that's going to happen overnight. It's not the kind of thing that is going to be happen quickly or cheaply, but it's eating that elephant one bite at a time. You're going to need to start these things and start propagating them across the organizations.
And what we've found, go ahead.
Can you speak to your experience about the rate of change, evolving the data strategy versus the population size upon which you, inflict these changes?
So, for example, if Todd's trying to develop a data strategy for the entire state of New York, it's going to look very different than an agency director or a department director doing one for theirs, right? That's the...
Right, and from what I'm seeing in the field, the smaller sample size, the faster you can go through the versions.
Sure.
Because eventually you're going to lose traction and momentum if you try to influence a group like this with 23 versions in 6 months.
Don't want to have 23 versions in 6 months. That's too many. All right. So thank you for that. Absolutely good point. The real key to this is you're also talking about sizing and scoping things. Right? Don't look at your entire organization and say we're going to come up with one thing that's going to be perfect for the entire organization. Let's take one aspect of our organization, apply a strategy to that one aspect, prove that it makes some improved business outcomes. And I keep using the word business, so you guys know what I'm talking about here. And then use that to demonstrate, get momentum, and show people the way this works.
Yeah. Try not to boil the ocean. You've heard that expression. How many different exercises, whether it's IT or otherwise, where people have taken, they've tried to do it all at once, whereas it's really critically important to start building a consensus and inertia around it so that you can build organizational momentum and start to add in additional functionality, capability, rules, and that's very much a crawl, walk, run sort of thing.
And I'll go even further than that. In something like MDM, or something that's going to require a fairly significant IT investment, all right, I have literally been to places where they have flown in 3 plane loads of consultants on Monday morning. They spent $60 million installing an MDM system, and then the rest of the organization's kind of looking around going, what? That was the organization where I heard I didn't know where to stick the data, so I stuck it in the MDM thing. So here's the problem. MDM is sophisticated stuff and it requires some practice and expertise.
Yep.
Okay, no problem. The best way to approach that is to take something in your organization. You all have SQL Server. Where's our Microsoft guy, right? We have every organization out there has SQL Server, right? So you can build your own MDM-like functionality in SQL Server. I'm not even saying buy Microsoft's master data management solution, which is a good solution, but don't buy it. Just build one. Because the process of building one takes you a week to do something, and then a year of playing with that, and now you're ready to have a conversation with it. All right. The analogy for this is kind of like what they do when teenagers discover babies are cute. They give them an 8-pound sack of flour. They put a little, magic marker on it and say, give your baby a name, and now start to carry this baby around with you for 6 weeks, and let's see how that sack of flour looks after 6 weeks, right? Kind of a horrible analogy, but it works pretty well. So the point here, though, is that the data strategy, instead of trying to have something for every piece on the wheel or whatever it is only going to be focused on trying to get one thing done. Get your people, process, and technologies around that, and use this as an excuse to get better at certain things. So the strategy is, we're going to do better with our governance because we're now going to start governing some master data with a solution that we've developed ourselves. Now again, every one of you has this SQL Server environment and can get somebody, just go get an intern from one of the many fine colleges and universities up here to build you a little bit of thing that manages some aspects of this master data.
Right. And I was going to say, at the federal level, one of the things that the feds have done very nicely is have this concept of system accreditation. So there's an external entity that measures a system before it's allowed to go into production. What you can do with these kinds of things is you can say, look, if you're going to upgrade that system, if you're going to re-platform, re-host it, if you're going to do something to that IT platform, there's an opportunity for them to start using a particular master data element, for example. And you can tie these things together so that the systems aren't having so much work that they're physically unable to do everything, but you can time it and space it where it becomes just additional work that they could estimate, they could plan, they could execute and measure at the end. So these things can work together between traditional IT execution and strategic planning at the same time.
What we do find, though, is that it's just a big jump to, let's not pick up master data. If you're going to put a metadata repository, if you're going to bring on a big data quality initiative, all of these things fall into the same category. Let's not be comprehensive. Let's go very focused. We've never found that master data works without at least some support from governance and some aspect of quality. Again, take their wonderful solution that they've got and fill it full of rubbish data, right? You haven't solved any problems. You still have exactly the same problem. I'll tell you, this is an oopsie we made in Virginia. We bought one of those. It was not 60 million. I think we spent about 40 million of the taxpayer dollars on it. And the organization that put it up decided they were going to call it enterprise data management. Okay, labels are important. So they kept going to all the agencies saying, wouldn't you like some enterprise data management? Everybody said, what do you think I'm doing? And then they asked the question, how much does it cost? Oh, we don't know. Use it, and we'll tell you what the bill is afterwards, right? That works out really well in state government. So we've done dreadful there. Okay, so I think we've killed this particular slide, which means we go to the next slide, which just says version 2. Right? The next thing that you're going to do, maybe this is around warehousing. Well, still more governance, but maybe in this case for this, organization, you need to have some, there we go, expertise in here that also talks about data acquisition strategy. So the point is, most people are trying to be very comprehensive in their strategy. Forget it. Organizations change too fast. The technology changes too fast. It's never going to work. We're working with one federal agency that wanted a 10-year plan for their data governance.
Think about that. What plan have you ever seen that can survive 5 years, let alone 10 years?
Corporate strategic planning is 3 years in today's environment. There's no way it's going to work. I've got a couple of pet peeves on this. I don't like a couple of words on here, and one of them is the word methodology. Okay, if you look up what the word methodology means, it's the study of methods. So when somebody comes to you and says, I have a methodology, they're really using the term incorrectly. Method is a perfectly good word, so let's just use the word method. And same thing, we've got to develop some metrics, right? Well, no, you're going to develop some measures. I was at one company where they said we wanted to put our KPIs into this thing, and we want a dashboard so we can see how we're doing. We cut them off at 1,400 KPIs. Like, nobody can manage 1,400 KPIs. That's just not going to work good. So let's look at how this would go into data strategy. Well, effectiveness. Now, we've already said that most data strategies are going to be of longer term, they're programmatic, right? So you want to have something there that said, when we put in our master data management solution, we did it in 1 year and achieved success at this level, and the average takes this much to show some results for that short version. Again, does it make sense here? If you have a 10-year plan, anybody going to be ready 10 years to sit down and measure this stuff? No. But shorter, bite-sized chunks are going to give, did that piece of the elephant taste good?
That's right.
We're going to have all sorts of elephant jokes coming out of this second well.
Right.
So over time, we're going to be able to measure. If your data strategy is longer than the organization strategy, dead on arrival, right? So most organization strategies actually come down to some very precise measurements, very precise ways of describing this. I'll just give you Walmart's again, it's nothing secret. Walmart's business strategy is everyday low price. Every associate, every vendor, every consultant, everybody in the entire organization understands that. And when they're making decisions, they look and say, on which side do I make this decision that results in the lowest price for the consumer? Because that's what their mission is, right? So again, very simple stuff. They don't even have a document that describes that. So having a 100-page data strategy, I'm going to read it. Versions, again, critical there that somebody understands this is the first version, and I can now tie some benefits back to version 1. I may even want to start version 2 before version 1 is done. Okay? And finally, you've got to make sure that everybody actually understands what it is we're talking about. It goes back to all the talks you've probably heard on enterprise architecture, where people say the enterprise architecture is how you visualize how the organization is implementing data as a strategy. Good. All right. Failing to adequately manage expectations. So we've kind of hit on this a little bit already.
This never happens.
What's that?
Everybody knows what the expectations are.
Oh, yeah.
IT, I'll have it delivered in 3 weeks. Right?
No problem.
Piece of cake.
So the way most organizations go about doing strategy of any sort is that they start off with business needs, and then they say, great, let's do a strategy. Anybody notice an important variable missing in that equation? Yes, where are you on your journey? So I think that is the worst way to develop a strategy. Instead, you need to look at what the organization is. And only when you have a match between the organizational capabilities and the business needs is something likely to be a successful strategy for you. The analogy here is very simple. Anybody have a 16-year-old driver at home? Would you hand them the keys to your brand new Tesla Model 3? Not yet. Okay. Something different about Teslas, just so that you know, when you're accelerating on a Tesla, you push on the gas. When you lift off the gas, the brakes come on almost immediately without you realizing. So it's a different car to do than most of the cars do it. But do you expect good results handing a beautiful car, maybe it's a Jaguar instead of a Tesla, to a 16-year-old driver? No. We were all 16 once, right? Remember how that worked out? So you're looking for that match. Again, this goes back to build your own MDM-like stack internally, or your own metadata repository, your own data quality initiative, and get it to work here before you go out and invest millions and millions of taxpayer dollars in something like that.
Yep. Putting it another way, it's okay to have grassroots operations. What we're saying is that it's not just a top-bottom approach, and it's not just bottoms-up approach. It really is both. So the data that you can control and harmonize and orchestrate at a project or program level is critically important. It's one less factor to factor out of the equation later on. At some point, we would have to iterate over all of the projects and programs to normalize those elements, but at least the work is underway. Hopefully, we're starting to speak the same language, using the same vocabulary. So if I call something a master data element, we all have an idea what we're talking about. And we're fairly familiar with the back-end processes and the relationship back with the strategy.
By the way, I'll give you one more piece on MDM. The hardest part of visualizing MDM is to have an objective rule for looking at a piece of data and saying, is it or is it not master? If you can't come up with that rule by yourself and look at anything and say, is this a master data item? Right? You should not be investing millions and millions of dollars in software. There's a lot more work that needs to be done before you're ready to actually do that.
So putting that another way, what is he saying? The decision as to whether or not something is authoritative or not is a human decision. How you record that information is really almost irrelevant. You could today, because of finances, you may decide to record that in a spreadsheet because that's what works today, and that's what you have. That's perfectly appropriate. Third-party tools appear to be like silver bullets. They really don't solve the problem. We need to get the people involved, and most importantly, we need to get the business involved in making the determination as to this version is going to be authoritative over that version.
Ariel, didn't you have something about silver bullets in your... Is she still here or not? Gardner's pretty good about calling them silver bullets too. The other part of this is that when you start to execute, you've got to have a balance. You've got to balance business value that's occurring to your organization at the same time with understanding new capabilities. Many times organizations will be heavily reliant on consultants. They'll bring in, again, I'm a consultant, so you can yell at me on this one too. They'll bring in consultants who will make everything magic, because there are people that have done this thousands of times and they're really good at it. And then they leave and your organization's going, now what? So if management says, oh, it's all going to be about new capabilities, eventually it looks like a science experiment, and management goes, I'm not sure I'm going to have a science experiment. I'm going to pay for a science experiment. If it's all about value, then you're not building the capabilities that we need to have, because again, by far, most colleges and universities do not well teach this stuff. Okay? We'll get into that a little bit more later on. So on a business value perspective, I'm going to talk a little bit about something we've done in Virginia called the Governor's Data Interns Program. Our Secretary of Technology, Karen Jackson, looked around and said we have lots of agencies and they have lots of piles of data. And we, like you guys, have lots of good universities around. I wonder if there's something that could be done between the two of those. Why, as a matter of fact. So we take the students, this is a graduate level program, but it doesn't have to be restricted to graduate level. You've all got lots of data, and I'll give you a specific example. One of our departments we've been working with a lot in the just recent history is our Department of Aging and Rehabilitative Services. They provide services to people who need them, and we actually see a multiplier there that for every dollar we invest in those services, it saves the state $10. That's not a bad multiplier. They had tons of data on the people who received these benefits, but they'd never had time to sit around and look at people who were caregivers in that system. So they said, for this semester, for this class, and this is an ongoing process that we do, we want you guys to examine caregivers and look at this. Because of course, all of your organizations have lots of people sitting around on their hands that have absolutely nothing to do and are just waiting for you to show them a bunch of data so they can do a bunch of data analysis, right? No, it doesn't work that way in state government or in corporations. So if you've got projects that if I only had some extra cycles that I could do, and got students right up the street who are sitting around waiting for this, put together under a program run out of the CDO's office, you can now start to say, hey, we've got this going on here and this going on here. We can attach some students to some of these. Are these guys going to be primo data scientists? No. But are they going to give you some results that you need to have? Absolutely. Let me tell you a little bit about it. So again, many of our different agencies have tons and tons of data. Some of them do a great job of putting it out there on the web and taking a look at it. We pull them together and go through a screening process. So we have a committee that sits down and says, yes, these are good projects. And in fact, if you do this and you do this, we'll have chocolate and peanut butter and put them together. And we'll put something particularly useful. We've also found that there's a lot of munging that's involved in this. Who knows what the word munging means?
Billy does.
Data wrangling. Wrangling, great, okay, good. Now, what's wrangling? I agree with you.
Discovery.
What's wrangling?
Getting it in the right usable format.
There you go, see? So what we're trying to do, our transaction data is not organized to analyze from an analytics perspective. It's organized to do fast transactions so the customers don't have to wait for service. Wrangling is the term that most people use, but it's actually munging is the proper part because it's become official now in the dictionary. And the dictionary says it's not only is it all the things you have to do, but it's also what's happening when you do that. So let me just give you a very visual example. You've got, what's your name?
Forrest.
So Forrest? Yeah. Okay. So Forrest has a project that he wants to have. He's got some data. He gives the data. I go over here, give me all your data, Forrest. I want it all, right? And I go over here and I start to work on it. And I do the transformations that are needed to get it in analytic form. And I notice there's some quality issues in there, so we're going to push out some stuff that's not good. We'll get rid of the redundant stuff. And now I've got a pristine data set that I can apply whatever algorithm is I'm going to put on. Anybody see anything else useful from that exercise? Everything I've learned about transformations, restructuring, quality, et cetera, needs to go back into Forrest's production environment so that he can get the benefit from this. The key with the munging and the wrangling is that these are destructive acts on the data. They're not able to recover them. And the reason for that is because we haven't trained data scientists to do what all other scientists do and keep a lab notebook. If you're in pharmaceuticals, you keep a lab notebook because the lab notebook is how you reproduce your results. We got nothing going on in data science. And it's not just a matter of giving them a notebook and saying, write this stuff down. It's that there's no practices around this.
If you think about it, where there are high liabilities, there seems to be a correlation between the amount of documentation that gets produced. Think about food and drug FDA trials. The amount of first and second-hand documentation that goes into those data assets is phenomenal. They have what I like to call positive control all the way back to the source instrumentation, all the way down to the experiments and calculations that they've proved. But how does that compare to, say, data we have in our HR units, where you don't have the same degrees of liability? I would suggest the record keeping isn't the same. It may not even exist at all. So data typically moves around, and everybody is forced to reverse engineer the payload to figure out what it is so that they can begin to munge it up and get it in a ready state so they could ask questions of it. And if you think about the relative cost of doing that, it is not sustainable. You have to go back upstream and start putting these practices in place.
Crazy nuts. So what we've discovered over the years is that the classes that we're working with have different capabilities. And we may take Forrest data and hand it to a class that just munges it, but gives us all that feedback so that your deliverable is that you now understand a lot more about what you need to do to get your data in the shape you want to have into analysis. And then when we've got that pristine data set, then we'll hand it off to a computer science class that's really good with the algorithms piece of it. You can see there's a fair amount of overhead and control that has to be done here. Nobody's getting paid in Virginia on this. This is all done because the agencies are seeing enough benefit that they are signing up and there's a waiting list for people to get into these things.
And the next guy in line knows what's coming in. It's predictable, it's understandable, and my favorite, it's repeatable.
So I'll give you 3 examples in here. Virginia Department of Health, we discovered that we're spending a lot of money, taxpayer money, getting parents to verify that kids have vaccines. Okay? Most parents are really responsible and they get the vaccinations that they need to have. But it turned out in Virginia, the law was if you didn't have an original signature on the piece of paper, it was not valid. That seems crazy, right? So we went back and actually changed the law. That was the incentive to show, wow, maybe we don't actually need to have every vaccine certificate, individually signed on that particular piece. legislature's kind of perking up and going, oh, you can save money with data, this is good stuff, right? So that's Virginia Department of Health. Our DMV piece, every time there's a fatal accident in Virginia, it costs taxpayers $1 million. Okay? Now, we'd like people not to die, just for starters, but it's a pretty big cost to do that. We collect a bunch of data about that. They've never had a chance to go back and analyze it. So we're now analyzing the truck accidents and finding out how we can improve the CDL exam to shore up for the weak points in the truck accidents. That's going to take us a couple of years, and we'll find out eventually that this may result in fewer accidents, fewer fatalities for the Commonwealth, better driving records all the way around. The point is, though, with this university system behind us, there's a predictable, as Todd said, a repeatable process for moving some of these analysis types back into the agencies so that then the agencies can take either the production rules that have been set up or whatever else that goes on with it, and they can start to run with these things. So we're trying to raise overall the level of data literacy within the Commonwealth. Give you one more example. This is my favorite one here. We're going to try to get this. I'm pretending I'm a prisoner as a guest of our Department of Corrections here, okay? And if you take that information, we actually have a lawyer-approved process of mixing up the keys on this so we can do a one-way hashing and put all of this data out here for people to get. That same hashing algorithm, now that our lawyers have approved it once, can be utilized then in other areas. So we can go back and find out, Peter, where did he interact with the Department of Health, Juvenile Justice, Corrections, Social Services, Medical Assistance Services, et cetera, and we can find out a really cool piece of literature that was done that's basically, what are the 5 things you need to do to not end up a guest of the Virginia Department of Corrections? Anybody think that would be pretty useful information? Governors like that, right? They like to be able to talk about corrections. You'll find governors don't tend to talk about their corrections operations, even if they are very, very good. So we've got a lot of things that we can do back and forth on this. Billy, we're sort of like at a halfway spot. Do you want to give everybody a quick break on this, or?
Yeah, it might be a good time.
Okay, so let's give you guys a bio break of 15 minutes. Come back at quarter till, and then you're going to do your upcoming. So good for you guys that met some new people. Especially if you're here by yourself, right? Think of it like a singles thing. Go find somebody else. We're all in here in the same room trying to get this stuff to work. There were a couple of questions about we weren't articulating well enough for the back row to hear us. So if we don't do that, just raise your hand and we'll catch that. We just decided it's just too much trouble to do the microphone back and forth on this. So managing expectations is crucial here. And again, a 5-year plan for a CIO that's only going to last 2 years doesn't make any sense at all. So you've got to have expectations managed in here. We have a couple books up here for sale, by the way, too, and proceeds from Todd's book in particular go directly to the chapter. So that's really nice. These books, like I said, I've discovered that the thinner the book is, the more likely people are to read it. I know that's sort of counterintuitive. But this book was supposed to be called CIO's Art. There's how to make friends in high places, right? Think about the differences between what a CIO has to focus on versus what a chief financial officer or chief risk officer or chief medical officer has to focus on. It's not that their jobs are easier, but again, CIOs have an enormous realm of responsibility that they are responsible for. And data is usually the last thing that they think about. So working through all of these deadly sins then, Todd's already talked about a little bit, the program versus the project. This is one of the biggest barriers to getting data done well that we face in this. So we've seen application-centric development here for a long, long time. Organizations look, they say, I've got a strategy, got some IT, so we'll make some IT projects to help implement the strategy, and that's great. The problem is, as soon as you start to do that, this becomes the tail wagging the dog, okay, or at least we'd like it to be. IT projects and data programs are fundamentally incompatible. We've done well to get this far.
Yeah, I was going to say too, how many projects IT projects have you been involved in where, say, cost overruns happen? What's the first thing that goes away at the end? All the documentation that tells all of us how this darn thing was put together and what's in it. So we've got to do something about that problem, and I think we have certainly something that's worth discussing.
So do you see the bit, though, that's going to make people really upset, because this approach that we're doing currently means that the data is formed around the applications. The minute you buy a software package here, or decide that you're going to buy a software package here, it's all about what data fits into Satan's accounting package, right? You know, that's the joke on SAP, right? Satan's accounting package. Perfectly good software. Although they were so ahead of their time that it wasn't until version 3 they put printing features into this, because after all, it was the 90s and we were going to have paperless offices by then. How'd that work out for us all, right? Not so good. It also means that whatever process architecture that you have is going to be very narrowly formed around the applications, and there's very little data reuse that's possible given this. So if we want to flip this, and this is a huge shift, we're talking about your data governance groups should have veto authority over software purchases. By the way, write it into your charter. Most of the people signing the charters don't know what you're talking about, so at least you can come back and point to it and go, yeah, see, you signed it, boss. That's the way we're supposed to do it. If you start out with strategy and say, what data and information businesses are we in? Now you can start to say, what tools do we need to have support that particular mission? And that fundamental flip is huge, because this way we can now develop these assets from an organization-wide perspective. The systems that support this will now complement the existing organizational process flows, and quite frankly, we are not reusing any software outside of the open source community. And the reason is because in order to reuse software, you're either dependent on one person that knows where it is, or you're dependent on a well-established program, which is what the open software model is, in order to do this. Now you can start to maximize the data reuse that occurs in here.
Exactly. True story. In my previous life, I learned that there were 26 different parts of our organization that were all out trying to acquire the same data asset. So, I mean, you can play with numbers, but let's say it's $1,000 per copy, right? So now you're dealing with data that's significant and money that's significant. By pulling this out of projects where it's buried, you now can get some more eyes on it, and you can start regularizing and normalizing the acquisition, the processing, the provisioning, deprovisioning, the entire life cycle by getting it out of IT projects.
So it sounds as though, you know, we're going back to sort of a custom development application away from the COTS application, the commercial off-the-shelf application, which was, you know, we sometimes call it a software slam. Here is the software, this is what you're going to do, this is what you're going to adopt. And then, you know, that we went to that COTS model because it offered us a less costly and an enterprise version of the world, as opposed to sort of the waterfall custom development approach. It allowed us to do modularization, so to speak, implementation. So are you advocating for going back to customization, customized software?
When it's appropriate. What we see is that most organizations get sold a package, and IT oftentimes finds out about it. Sometimes it actually comes from the business, right? Because the salespeople know where to focus on where the money is, right? So, oh, by the way, we're installing PeopleSoft next week. Great, you know, where was the planning, where was it? And what you find out is that some of the fundamental data structures that are in there don't serve your organization well, which means you're going to have to go compensate for the deficiencies that are in those particular toolkits. The other part of it to think of, even if you are 100% COTS, your data architecture is the only thing that tells you how all those COTS packages relate to each other. So it's absolutely crucial to have this no matter what.
Yeah, and the other thing is maybe a philosophical change. So when you look at data, build it, design it, measure it with the intent of reusing it. Not so that it's going to live solely in a single system. And today we live in a connected world, and the number of connections up and out and down are only growing every day. So we really need to start thinking about data from day one as a reusable asset. Now, personally speaking, I don't care if it's COTS or something that's, you know, rolled inside. As long as you have control over the data independent of any application, that's the key thing for me.
So again, strategy, data and information, and then IT projects. So let's get even more explicit about it. This is back to the first diagram that we had up on there, talking about strategy. Remember, strategy is how your data assets are going to support the mission of the organization. So, how does that relate to governance? Well, we want to know what data assets do to support the business strategy. Again, in our professional practice, what Andrea and I spend a lot of our time doing is going around and helping organizations reinvigorate their data governance practices, because we have a lot of meetings and we're not sure anything's getting done. You know, we can come up here and talk to you about that in different contexts, but data strategy has to be expressed in terms of business goals. And that's what data governance should be doing, is focusing on the business goals. Similarly, going back the other direction, the language of data governance must be metadata. If you're talking about something that is esoteric or not concrete, you're not doing things that are people have enough trouble. Remember, we're a self-selected group. The rest of the world's like, well, I think they've got that data part pretty much taken care of. And we're going, no, we don't. We need more people to join us in this particular process. So again, business goals, metadata coming back out. I subordinate IT projects for that. That is going to make a lot of people upset. But when you can start to show them that these results make a difference in your organization, they will come on board as well.
So Peter talked about data rot before. I think we can all identify in our organizations redundant IT projects. How many duplicative projects do our organizations have going on right now? I would say it's a fair number. How many copies of the data, whether they're commercially acquired, homegrown, or through sharing relationships, are replicated across the enterprise? These things add up, and they add up very, very quickly. So the idea is to start identifying these things and start normalizing them as soon as you can. And the first step is, what data does the enterprise, does the organization need to function and be successful? That's the first question.
When you look at it from this perspective, it looks a little bit confusing and a little bit hard. So rather than tell your organizations that Peter and Todd said you're all screwed up and you have to do it Peter and Todd's way, take 10 IT projects that are going on next year and try 3 of them this way. And now you've got your own individual A/B test inside your organization. How did it work? Maybe we should do more, maybe we should do less. But of course the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. And that, of course, is not happening for anybody when you consider the hockey stick curve that we've got these things going up in terms of the volume. Very good.
Did you talk about Kmart in 300?
I hadn't mentioned that yet, but go ahead.
No, it's your story. This is a great story about what can happen in an organization that is not really doing the simplest things like keeping an inventory. What happens, Peter?
They stopped us after we showed them 300 instances of them buying their own data back. That's just a waste of money, right? But this is literally, they're out on the side. Yes, here's what. It's like, really? They just said at 300, that's enough. We don't need to do any more, but there won't be any more, was the key.
Right. How many organizations, let's say governmental organizations, are buying their own data back from vendors, third-party vendors? I don't know the example, but I would love to keep a count on that.
You need to have a programmatic way of sharing your data. And I mean that by using the word program the way we've been using it so far. Now, if we had PMI people in here, we would ask the question, are you certified? PMI 20 years ago, people wouldn't have known what a project manager was. They might have had a good person doing good things, but beyond that, they didn't know. PMI did a fantastic job of codifying the language into it, and they called it the PMBOK, Project Management Institute Body of Knowledge. And now if you have a certified project manager in there, they have passed a test, demonstrated knowledge, skills, and ability to people in an objective fashion that says these people are now qualified to be project managers on your projects. Great. So of course we decided that was a good idea, and in DAMA we went through and did this ourselves. We need some marketing help because we called ours the DIMBOK. I'm serious, we need some marketing help, okay? By the way, that last chart of the 3 things, strategy, IT, and data stuff, that was a contribution by a colleague, right? Who came back one day and said, I know you're trying to talk about this, how about if you did it this way, right? So again, great examples of how to pull all these things together. The problem with programmatic is that most people don't understand data as a program. So they think of assets, but they forget that data is one of those assets in there. And data ends up being, in our opinion, the most powerful, underutilized, and poorly managed asset that organizations have. In fact, if you think about it, it's the only asset that you have that isn't depletable. You can't use it up. It doesn't degrade over time. It is durable in nature. That means people invest in it and keep it so that they can do more towards their mission. in the longer run. But it is an accounting term, and we did find some examples where the data is showing up on the balance sheet in the book in order to do that. So when you compare data assets to other assets, it really has some unique properties that the other assets don't. But what we tend to see is, if you Google this phrase, you will find 5 million hits. Data is the new oil. This is so the wrong way to think about it. I was over in Saudi Arabia this year, and they love this, right? Oh yeah, because oil's no good anymore, and apparently we want data. The problem with thinking about data as oil is that you think about it in a production sense. Do you ever think about what happens to the oil byproducts that after you put them in your car or your lawnmower or anything else? Somebody else said it already. Data is more valuable the second time you use it and the nth time that you use it than it is the first time. So thinking about it in a production sense is absolutely the wrong way to think about it. Change it just a bit. Have any gardeners in the room? Okay. So let's just take this, right? When you see this, data's the new oil, change it to the new soil. Because after all, when you're gardening, this implies two things that are important. I live in Hanover, Virginia, and we have something called Hanover tomatoes that we're very proud of. Okay? But you don't get those tomatoes by just walking out and sprinkling seed randomly around the neighborhood. It doesn't work that way, does it? You prepare the soil. There is a preparation process that you use. The other part of it is, I don't plant my tomatoes on Tuesday and expect to eat them on Thursday, do I? There is a definite amount of time that it takes to get them there, and data is the same way. So we want the preparation and we want the growing period to be in people's minds when they think about it. Because when they think of oil, open a can, pour it in the tank, and we're ready to go, right? And that's not the way we want you to think about data at this point, particularly in the state we're at right now. If you need to call it bacon to get it to sell, whatever works, right? That's okay. But data deserves its own strategy because it is a unique asset and because it has that unique set of properties that other assets do not. And it needs attention on par with similar organization assets. We will no longer need a data program when we no longer need an HR program. And people will kind of get that if you start to say it. By the way, there's probably a better version of that, and that's where we want you guys to come out and help us out with this. It also needs professional administration to make up for past neglect. Now, I apologize for using this analogy here, but my wife's getting a new crown right now, so it's a dental analogy, right? Okay, you haven't brushed your teeth for 40 years. You're not going to have somebody help you with that. You need a professional, right? Do I pull them all out and replace them with crowns or whatever else it is? We have the need, because we haven't done this well in the past, to make up for the past mistakes. Now, Todd's already talked about the program versus the project, so we won't go through this, but these are some very good distinctions in order to do this. You need your data program out here because projects end, data does not, right? You need some financial backing in order to do this. You need governance. You need to have a greater scope on this, and you need to have executive leadership around here. Because the real problem is we're still teaching people that this is how you build systems. Requirements, design, implementation, verification, and then maintenance. This is all wrong. By the way, this went off the rails in 1959, the year I was born. All right, and I can tell you that story over beer sometime on it. But what we're telling students is that you're going to implement your data and your software at the same time. That is absurd. The only way this model can work is if you are not sharing any data outside of this project. I think that's pretty insightful. I had somebody else point that out to me, but I think that's pretty insightful. So in other words, if I've got project 1 and data, but I need to exchange that with project 2 over here, project 1 says that's my stuff, and I'll pay for things that are within this box, and project 2 says I'll pay for this, which means we need a third project to handle the interfacing between the two of those. That's how we've done it. But of course now somebody's, is that project 1 or is it project 2 whose budget pays for it? It's going between sales and accounting, blah, 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 blah.
The other thing that this does, it compartmentalizes the organization's information, meaning what information does the organization need at the strategic level in order to be successful. Really, if you think about what's going on here, you have individual projects, probably departmental level organizations or smaller, defining what information the organization writ large has in its possession. Instead of asking the other question, what data does the organization need in order to be successful in its line of business? A much different question. Much different question.
So again, shared data structures require programmatic development and evaluation. If you don't have somebody paying attention to this, you'll end up with what you've inherited, which is all of us inherited our legacy environments. By the way, my definition of legacy, anything that's in production. So don't let them try to say, oh no, it's got to be COBOL to be legacy, right? Now, all these little object stuff that's going around, they are requiring even more documentation than usual instead of less. So does this make sense from a programmatic perspective? Something has to be done at a top level of your organization to say, if we want to share data among these applications, we need the same kind of professional administration we do for HR.
So the other thing that this slide is hinting at but doesn't say explicitly is that there should be discussions going on at the organizational level between, say, IT governance and data governance at a business level. What tools do we need to be successful? What data do we need to be successful? How should those tools be implemented, which ones we have, and how they should interoperate are all secondary to those fundamental questions.
So the last one of these is, oops, sorry, next to the last one. Leadership, we talked a little bit about it, it's sort of problematic. But what do we teach our knowledge workers about data? And what percentage of them use it every day? This doesn't seem right, does it? So the next book we're thinking about doing is focused specifically around data literacy and saying, what do you have to do to be a good citizen in today's environment? And in order to understand how all of these things work.
Good example, maybe even for my job, maybe for some of the others. Go out there and on the internet and search for chief data officer or similar roles, right? Now start thinking about that as compared to like a CIO or CFO or CEO. Now if you write a job vacancy for a CFO or CEO, what kind of person do you think is going to come in the door? What kinds of knowledge, skills, and abilities is that person going to have? What kind of an educational foundation, undergraduate, graduate, and professional certifications? My point is, those things exist. There are university courses that will teach you and give you a degree in business. There's an MBA that you can get. You can get accounting kinds of credentials and certifications. Now step over here into the data space. Has anybody found a degree program yet in data? Not database management, data. Where is it?
I'm a graduate of business analytics program at RPI.
Business analytics, right. So what's analytics? After all of this stuff that Peter and I are talking about is done, is in place, then it's in a ready state for somebody to exploit that data and discover new insights about our organization, its holdings, and so on and so forth. But where are the fundamental concepts taught? Where are the industry credentials? And this is where DAMA is playing such a critical role, because they are one of the first organizations to start saying that there is a real need, a real business and social need for these capabilities. So this is one of the things that we actually talked a lot about in the book.
So think about it for just a quick second here. Mordak, the preventer of information services. Many people think that Y2K was a waste of time. Okay? Those of us that lived through it know it wasn't a waste of time. Really bad stuff was going to happen if we didn't fix it. Okay? And we did a pretty good job of fixing it. But why should a knowledge worker know something about whether Fox Pro has been made Y2K compliant or not? Right? It's just nuts. This is the Y2K demon. He says, oh, you're not so bad. And then it's like, oh, yeah, it's really kind of cute, right? And it's, I mean, here's an example of a query that we worked out with one organization. That's a mess. They had never been educated that there's something called query optimization, which, by the way, is a machine done. So it makes it easier. It's still a big query. But if you run that query 1 billion times a day, that's a large number, you end up death by 1,000 cuts at your organization, as people don't realize that this is happening. And when we look at it, just from the IT budgets alone, organizations are spending 20 to 40% of their money migrating, converting, or improving their data. It's even worse when it gets down to the actual professional level. Right? Go ahead.
I was going to say, even on the data analyst perspective, some of the numbers today are showing that you're spending, which may or may not be true in your instance, 80 to 85% of your time getting data in a ready state to ask one question.
The munging and the wrangling.
The munging and the wrangling, right. So if this were an investment, would you want to make that investment? No way, not in a million years. So the question becomes, where do we start addressing the problem? And these are some of the areas.
And let's take it one step further. what we teach IT people about data, one course. One
Database
course
management.
is how to build a new database. Now, if there's a skill we do not need any more of on this planet, period, it is how to build new databases.
In Foxborough.
I will just say databases, period, right? Can you imagine what this teaches not just us, but our managers, our leaders, who've gone through programs? Again, RPI is a phenomenally good program, right? But if the only thing they learn out of there about data is that this is what you need to build new databases, they don't think you're building new databases, do they, Forrest? They think you're doing analytics, right? But you, of course, build databases as a part of that process, but you also do all the munging, the wrangling that we talked about in there as well. So they get the impression that data is a technical skill that they really just don't need to have. And the problem with that is that the only tool you know how to use is a hammer. Every problem looks like a nail. So when people out there in the business world see it, they go, oh, well, my college taught me that to fix that problem, I'm going to build a new database. Now, the good news is guaranteed employment for everybody in this room as long as we live. We're going to take a long time to solve this particular problem. Here's really bad, though. This is an example that is still given in college. The disk access time is a combination of the seek time plus the rotational latency. The students are going, what do you mean disks rotate? My disks are flat, right? There is no rotational latency on these things. There are other ways of transferring data in and out, but the rotating disk, and the students get taught this, they immediately tune out and say, well, that professor doesn't know what's going on in the real world. And you ask the professor, and they go, well, yeah, sure, we've still got rotating disks. And they go, your machine's a ½ an inch thick. What sort of rotating disks do you have in your machine that's a ½ an inch thick? Oh, yeah, the disks no longer rotate. It's so bad.
Use the CRS database to size the market.
That data is wrong.
Then use the SIBS database.
That data is also wrong.
Can you average them?
Sure, I can multiply them too.
They don't know that they don't know, right? So we've already talked about most of this. Again, top data job, enterprise data executive, chief data officer, I don't care what we call it, but let's put somebody in charge of this. And a trick, if you've got nobody in your office doing this, write a little sign and put it on your desk and say, I'm in charge of this entire organization's data. And eventually somebody will come along and say, Andrea, who told you you could do that? And what you do at that point is say, if not me, here's your sign. Remember that joke from the old days? Yeah. The minute you put it on a sign, somebody's going to start paying attention to it, and eventually.
Yeah, so interesting story. Peter and I were over at MIT a couple weeks ago at a CDO summit at the university. And one of the interesting things that we were talking about was all of the CDOs that are in either business or in the government, public or private space, there's a large percentage of them that are IT people. So one of the things that we talked about a lot was how can we get the business back into the driver's seat, take control of the data that they need, that they use, that they own every day. To a large degree, I believe that the business has abdicated responsibility because for years they've been beaten up by IT. How many times have you been at a meeting with business people, non-technical folks? You get an IT guy in the room and they start talking techno-babble, and what happens to the other side, to the business side? If they don't understand the language that they're speaking, they shut down. And very, very shortly thereafter, they leave and don't ever come back. So IT has been making decisions on behalf of the business for quite a long time. And this is really an opportunity to put the business back in the driver's seat for a lot of these things.
The last one, we say for last, is not understanding data-centric thinking. Everybody kind of agrees that we ought to be more data-centric. But until we come up with objective, measurable capabilities of what that means, it's just sort of vaporware that's out there. So I am what's called a horse husband. That means that my wife likes horses, hopefully at least as much as me, maybe a little more, I'm not sure. And if I want to catch her on the weekends or at night, she's in the barn or on horseback. So I learned to join her on that particular process. We built a barn. Great. What does this have to do with anything? Well, interestingly, the bank gave us exactly this much money to build the barn. And then they stopped. And they said, now you must wait to get the second draw on that. For what? Foundation inspection. somebody objective from the county comes up and makes sure that we have built a good quality foundation. Why does this make the bank smart? Because if I build a good barn with a poor foundation, I will spend the money that I should be paying off the bank loan with in vet bills for the horses. And that's not a good investment for the bank to make. There is no IT equivalent of this.
What's behind the foundation, Peter? Standards, construction standards, things that can be objectively measured and compared.
All of this is a lot like Maslow, and everybody for some reason remembers their Maslow from high school. It starts out here: if you are missing your food, clothing, and shelter, you are never going to be safe. And if you are never safe, you can never get to love and belonging. If you never have love and belonging in your life, you'll never have esteem. And finally, we get to self-actualization or flow on the top. Well, this is very much like that in data. There's this wonderful golden triangle with all the buzzwords that are largely technology focused. But our foundation here, knowing that this is just the tip of the iceberg, that we in this room understand, we've got to have these foundational practices in place to support the analytics, the things that people want to do. And these are much more about capabilities than they are about technologies. So while people tell us, yes, I want to do this, by the way, you have to do it by Friday though? Oh, wow, okay. So if you want to do it that fast, it will take longer, it will cost more, it will deliver less, and it'll present greater risk to the organization than if instead you learn how to do that properly. By the way, that is shamelessly ripped off from Tom DeMarco. Some of you may remember him from the old days. Tom was asked, could you do your IT stuff faster? And he said, yes, I can do it faster, but if I do it faster, it'll take longer. Yeah, makes good sense. So let's take those 5 areas now and put them into the DMM, which we've alluded to a little bit here. This is a cooperative effort with DAMA and Carnegie Mellon. The nice part about this is that your bosses have all heard of the capability maturity model, CMM. Well, this is CMM for data. And what it says is you're going to have a strategy. You need to have some professionals that manage this. You don't have to make all of your data quality perfect, but you need to get the data that's being used to make decisions fit for purpose in that. You need to do it with the right technology and with the right processes around it. You need to have some supporting processes in place. That's not the issue. Here's what happens. The foundation is only as strong as the weakest link. So here's my weak link. By the way, the score is very straightforward. You get 1 point for having a pulse. If your process is repeatable, you get 2 points. If it's written down, you get 3. If you start to measure things that are happening in your process, now you get 4 points. And if you sit down collectively and say, how's it going? Can we do it better? Now you get 5 points. Okay, so that's a pretty easy scale. So those are the 5 points that we have here. And just in illustrating this one, we're going to say that all of these things, quality, governance, platform architecture, operations, are all at level 3, but that they don't have a strategy. I'm just using that as an example because it works really well for the book. What this means is that the entire foundation only scores a 1 on this assessment. And until we bring this 1 up to be a 3, I could put $1 billion in data quality and it won't help the rest of the organization. This is a great technique for helping to decide where to invest and what capabilities you need to do in your organization. Getting towards lunch, and this is the one that I think we're going to get a better response on, but here's my first inarticulate piece of it. Todd and I were scratching this stuff one night and we said, well, it's really about sort of 3 things. There's uneven literacy in organizations, there's uneven data supply, and there's uneven use of standards. So in order to get these to work, we want to kind of make these things better. Okay, so I said, let's smooth them out and make them a data sandwich. Like that? Okay. The 2 points. 1, that can't happen without engineering and architecture, none of which are taught in business schools or computer science. Okay? These are huge, huge problems. And 2, it can't happen by accident.
And this is where governance comes into play, whether it's IT governance, or data governance, or data analytics governance. That is where the decision's made about smoothing out the edges on all of those areas.
So the gentleman in Chicago came up to me and said, this is good, but I know you're looking for a better one. So think of this and this as a couple of jaws, and this is the food. Maybe we could do some, eating, and we'll see how it gets to that. It's a good idea, though. So here's George Box. I told you about him before. All models are wrong. However, some models are useful. Now, this last piece I want to leave you with here is something that we put up on a website called the Data Doctrine, and we want the conversation. So we said, what 4 criteria can we put in place that would be objective to tell whether your organization is doing things data-centrically? And if you read this, you might have seen this before because this is shamelessly ripped off the Agile Manifesto. We're uncovering better ways of developing IT systems by doing it and helping others do it. Through this work, we've come to value, and here's where we differ from the Agile Manifesto, because the Agile Manifesto is very good and it makes sense. Data programs precede software development, stable data structures precede stable code, shared data precedes completed software, and data reuse precedes repeatable code. Very quickly, we'll run through them on this. We talked about this a little bit already. Data programs and software projects don't work. Okay? You can't take a project and say, okay, and by the way, this project is going to take data from here, here, and here and make it all be wonderful unless you have this other programmatic activity going on. It's not going to work. Data is different from IT. IT creates things. IT is very good at saying, you've got a need, I can develop some capabilities that you'll be able to use to fix this. Data, on the other hand, evolves, and it evolves gradually. Go back to the gardening analogy. You don't plant your tomatoes on Tuesday and expect to harvest them on Thursday, unless you live next to Chernobyl, right? Data evolution needs to be separated from, it needs to be external to, and it needs to precede system development lifecycle activities. This is a big change for organizations. And when you're changing something, you're implying somebody's doing something incorrectly. So again, it gets to that who's moving my cheese kind of an argument on here. Again, they need to be separated and sequenced in order to do this. Stable data structures need to precede stable code. Now, whether we're buying it or building it, the answer is still the same. Here's a very quick example. This actually dates back a long time into the Defense Department, where I had the title Data Reverse Engineering Program Manager, which was pretty bizarre. But the idea here is that the business rule is that one person can be 0 or 1 employees, and that an employee can then occupy a position or not a position in order to do this. Well, if I'm going to buy that software for the Defense Department, where 30% of the people at one point in time had outside employment with another agency, in other words, they were working full-time for the Army but maybe part-time for the Navy, all right? That's not going to work. So when we look at the two of these things, we can say this one has better data rules, better architecture that is more supportive of the organizational strategy than not. And when I put them side by side, which is what a data group should do, if somebody is selling you software, half of the software vendors now will come along and say, here is a logical model of our data, right? And you can determine whether it's going to meet your organizational needs or not. That's great. The other half say, no, it's proprietary, we're not going to show it to you, in which case you sneak over to your purchasing manager and say, if they're not going to give us a model of the data, we don't even want to talk to them. Makes your job a lot simpler. The point is, this data structure here is going to require 2 more structural loops to go through and capture all of the people and all of the positions that this one data structure supports over here. Again, data structures must be specified prior to software acquisition, because those data structures matching up with what your organization does gives you the best fit on that software in your organizations. Shared data needs to be done before completing the software. Most of the time people have an idea that we're doing something, but it's kind of hard to figure out what it is. Like put a little gray triangle up there in the corner. But the first time that you use the data, you go out and say, hey, give me some data, and we put it in here. The part we haven't done is push that data back into the data group and extend our capabilities. And the more we do this, the more concrete it becomes, and the more people respect the outputs that we are producing over time here. So again, shared data structures cannot exist without this programmatic development. And finally, the last piece on this is data reuse needs to really precede reusable code. If I'm looking at this, I may have a DBA that does this very, very well, but if I don't have a function that sits here that says, by the way, you're using the same data structures here and you should use the same data structures, this, and this will have the same data but rearranged completely differently for no good reason. Now, you ask why we should do data first? Because if I'm going to go change a program in here, I have 9 changes in this environment that I might need to make. But if I'm going to change that data, my data change formula, worst case scenario is n times n minus 1 over 2, or 36 individual pieces if I want everything to connect to everything else. Does everybody see this? Okay, very important to catch all of that. So again, data programs, stable data structures, shared data have to precede the rest of these activities in order to make that work. So again, our 7 deadly sins are failing to address cultural needs. But I'm a technical person. Why do I have to do that? Because if you start down this journey, somebody else isn't going to understand what it is you're doing. You need the cover. You need to let people see this is a different way of doing business. You need to sequence that data strategy implementation. You need to manage expectations. You absolutely need to come in and align the data with your IT projects. You need to come along and implement these programmatic ways of data sharing. You need to have qualified leadership. And finally, you've got to think data-centrically. As we do that, we'll start to change people's perception. Right now, most people think data is somewhere in the middle there, that bat sign. We really want you to think about data as this is what IT and the business are hanging on to, as it is going way, way crazy and out of control on this. If somebody tells you this should be easier, there's a great YouTube video by a comedian named Gary Gulman that I'm going to spend 3 minutes here and show you. Oh yes, and let me give you the premise on this too. Gary's set up for this. He's on Conan one night. My wife calls me. There's a stand-up comedian doing data jokes. You got to get down here, right? So his premise is that there's a documentary, an hour-and-a-half documentary called The Abbreviated State. And it's about the 7 men and 1 woman who went down and abbreviated all the states to 2 letters. Okay? Nice little setup on this. So let Gary finish us off here.
The men and 1 woman who abbreviated all 50 states down to 2 letters. All you have to know for this is that we have 50 states in America and they each have a 2 capital letter abbreviation. But that wasn't always the case. Up until 1973, every state had its own length of abbreviation and it was chaos. Like Massachusetts was MASS period, Florida was FLA, Utah was Utah. They just dropped the H, not much of an abbreviation. But then the post office said, no, every state has to have a 2 capital letter abbreviation. And so they convened a crack squad of abbreviators charged with abbreviating all 50 states down to 2 letters. Now, I read this description to the documentary, and much like you, thought to myself, how are they going to make a 98-minute documentary about a task that couldn't have taken more than 6 minutes to complete? Boy, was I wrong. It was an adventure. Alabama lulled them into a false sense of security. They said, Alabama, AL, this is easy. We're going to finish before they stop serving breakfast in the hotel restaurant. I said, what's next? He said, Alaska. Everybody cool with AL? But somebody caught it. One man sheepishly raised his hand and said, sir, I think we might have used that one before. Are you sure? I'm pretty sure. Well, let's check the minutes. AL, Alabama, AL, we did use that one before, boss. And the boss said, guys, not a big deal. We'll come back to it. It's not going to happen again. Certainly not going to happen 27 more times. Foreshadowing. So what's next? Arizona, AI, there we go, we're back on track. Next, Arkansas. No, we'll come back to it, it's not going to happen again. What's next? California, CA, there we go. Next, Colorado, CO, Momentum, Connecticut. By the time they got to Maine, Maryland, Massachusetts, followed by Michigan, Minnesota, Mississippi, and Missouri, shots were fired. They were at each other's throats. So they did what any savvy business would do. They hired a consultant. They brought in a contractor. I'm sorry, not a contractor, a contractor. A man.
It's well worth watching the whole thing. So, have we given you guys a little bit different picture on what it means to think about data strategy? Let's not get a big, overwhelming strategy. Let's not try to put this strategy in place in an environment that is quite hostile to data programs right at the moment. And again, I mean hostile, not in a bad sense. They're not bad people, right? But if you're trying to do programmatic things in a project mode, you are set up for frustration. And it will be continuing to do the same types of problems that we've had all the way around here. Todd's the 6th CDO, if I recall, the second here, but 6th CDO of states that have come out in place. So New York has a really good opportunity here to really jump ahead of some of these. And the leadership team here is really, really well posed. And Todd has some things he can tell you about and some things he can't tell you about.
Yes, so basically, a lot of these things that we're talking about today, we've got to start turning into organizational activities. So without going into a lot of details here, because I'm not here in my official capacity, so let me just say that. There are things that we're talking about today that we're going to start talking about and start going to try and realize when I'm over here in my official capacity. So what I would invite other people to do is to stay tight with me. We would love to get you involved in some of those activities where we can solve these things together. Because one thing is apparent, is that you cannot solve these things alone. We live in a increasingly connected world, and we have to make sure that when we're sharing data, that both sides of the equation understand what's going on. The technical formats, of course, but the terms and conditions of usage, and how that data is to be used in any subsequent activities. So I would encourage people, please reach out to myself. John Rager is here, and Diane Boyd in the back from our office, and let's solve this together.